Welcome to week 5 of phase 3. Only 3 more weeks left. This week we're going to be multiplying and dividing rational expressions. Okay, so it looks like there's a lot going on here. We want to make sure that we're always going to reduce first. Okay, reduce first and then simplify. We want to factor, simplify, then multiply. So a little rhyme I like to remember is multiplying rationals ain't no problem. Top times the top, bottom times the bottom. Dividing rationals, don't ask why. Flip the second, then multiply. So I'm going to write the one for multiplying up here. With multiplying rationals, you're going to do top times the top and bottom times the bottom. Okay, top times the top, bottom times the bottom. Okay, and we want to make sure that we reduce first. Okay, so let's look at number 9. Number 9 says 6x squared y to the third times 10x cubed y to the fourth all over 2x squared y squared times 18y squared. Now we can multiply first and then reduce everything at the end. That may be easier as far as the variables go, or you can reduce first and then multiply. I think when it's just monomials and there's no factoring involved, you can go ahead and try and get rid of those. You can multiply first, then reduce. Okay, so let's go ahead and multiply top times the top. 6 times 10 is 60. X squared times x to the third. Remember, when multiplying, we add the exponents. That's x to the fifth. And then y to the third times y to the fourth is going to be y to the seventh. And then 2 times 18 is going to be 36. And there's nothing times x squared, so it's just x squared. And y squared times y squared is y to the fourth. And now we're going to reduce. Okay, so let me first reduce my numbers. We have 60 over 36. Okay, when you reduce 60 over 36, what can go into both? Let's see. I think it is going to be 12. So 60 divided by 12 is going to be 5. And then 36 divided by 12 is going to be 3. Okay? And then x to the fifth over x squared, we're going to subtract. So 5 minus 2 is 3. And then for the y's, we have 7 minus 4. Okay, 7 minus 4 is going to be 3. So our final answer is going to be 5x cubed y cubed all over 3. Okay. All right, for the sake of time, I'm going to move right to number 11. This one we're going to factor, reduce, then multiply. Okay, so I'm going to factor each thing separately. So I'll start with the first numerator, okay, and that has a 4x in common. So it's a GCF, so I factor out a 4x, and I'm left with x minus 1. Okay, the denominator there, first and foremost, I'm going to factor out a 2. Okay, if I factor out a 2, I'm going to be left with x squared plus 2x minus 3. And then we need to decide what multiplies to give us negative 3 and adds to give us 2. So my 2 will stay on the outside here, and then it will factor into our two binomials. Whatever multiplies to give us negative 3 and adds to give us 2, that's going to be 3 and negative 1. So it's x plus 3, x minus 1. All right, and then I'm going to multiply my next rational expression. The numerator there, what multiplies to give me negative 6, adds to give me 1. That is going to be 3 and negative 2. So that's x plus 3, x minus 2. And the denominator there, I have a 4x in common, so I will factor out 4x, and I'm left with x plus 2. All right, now here we can factor or reduce, we've already factored, we can reduce anything in the numerator with anything in the denominator. Doesn't matter which side it is, as long as one is on top and one is on bottom. So I have a 4x over here that will reduce with this 4x. I have an x minus 1 that will reduce with this x minus 1. I have an x plus 3 that will reduce with this x plus 3. And then what I'm left with is x minus 2 in the numerator and 2 and x plus 2 in the denominator. And this would be that rational expression multiplied and simplified. Okay, so we want to factor, reduce, multiply. So really we're just putting anything left on top together and anything left on bottom together. If there's nothing left on top, it would just be 1. If there's nothing left on bottom, it would be 1. All right, moving on to dividing rational expressions. Dividing rational expressions is the exact same thing, okay? The exact same thing as multiplying. We just have one additional step in the beginning, and that step is to flip the second, okay? So dividing rationals, don't ask why, flip the second, then multiply. And then when we're doing multiplication, we revert back to what we were just doing. So dividing rational expressions, don't ask why, flip the second and make sure it's the second, then multiply. Now, important, okay, you want to do flip the second, then multiply. So before we factor, before we do anything, we flip the second, turn it into multiplication. Okay, so that's the very first thing we have to do. So for number 13, it becomes 5pq. This first one will stay the same. We're going to change it to multiplication and flip the second. So that is 8q to the 5th all over 35p squared q squared. Okay, and now we're just back to multiplication, which is what we were just doing. So we multiply top times the top, bottom times the bottom. I am going to reduce my numbers first because I don't have a calculator in front of me, and doing 16 times 35 and then trying to reduce it with the 40 up top might get a little hard. So I am going to reduce my numbers first. 8 and 16, okay, that will turn into a 1. This will turn into a 2. And then 5 and 35, this will turn into a 1, and this will turn into a 7. Okay, so I at least reduce my numbers first. That makes it a little bit easier without a calculator. So then I'm going to do 1pq times 1q to the 5th. So that's going to be 1pq to the 6th all over 2p cubed times 7p squared q squared. So that is 2 times 7 is 14. P cubed times p squared is p to the 5th. and I'm left with q squared. Right, and then I'm going to reduce from there. I already reduced my numbers, so I don't have to do that. I have 1p up top and 5 on the bottom. Okay, so 1 minus 5 is going to be -4, and that just tells me that my p is going to be on the bottom. So it's 14p to the 4th, and then 6 minus 2 is q to the 4th, and that will be on top since it's positive. And this will be your final answer. Right? You could have multiplied and got 40 over 16 times 35, whatever that is. I just don't have a calculator in front of me, so I reduced my numbers first to save us some time. All right, last one I'm going to do. We have about 4 minutes, and I'm going to do number 15. Number 15, we're going to factor first. Okay, factor first. So we have this numerator, I'm going to factor out a 2a squared. So I have 2a squared times a minus 6. And in my denominator, what multiplies to give me -12 and adds to give me -4, that's going to be -6 and 2. Okay, and then I am going to, you have to change this to multiplication and flip it. Okay, make sure you change it to multiplication and it flips. Okay, so we change this to multiplication and flip it. So what goes on top is the a squared minus 8a plus 15. So how does that factor? What multiplies to give you 15 and adds to give you -8, that's going to be -5 and -3. So that's a minus 3, a minus 5. And then I'm going to factor out a 8a squared from here, and I'm going to be left with 3 minus a. All right, so I'm going to start reducing here. When I reduce, I have an a minus 6, an a minus 6. Okay, I have an a squared and an a squared. And then 2 and 8 will reduce. Okay, 2 and 8 will reduce. This 2 will become a 1, and this 8 will become a 4. All right, and the only other thing I have here is this a minus 3 and this 3 minus a. Now we can't reduce those because subtraction is not commutative, but if we factor out a -1, this becomes a minus 3. Okay, so now I have an a minus 3 that I can reduce with an a minus 3. Okay, and let me cross this out so we don't get confused with what we have left. All right, so I have nothing left in the numerator here, but I do have an a minus 5. And then what's left in the denominator? I have an a plus 2 and a 4 times a -1. So that's -4. And that would be our final answer. Okay, we have about a minute left. I just want to talk about this one. What we want to do is you always want to do division first, and this 4k plus 1, let's go ahead and put that over 1. So that's going to be k plus 3 all over k times, we're going to change it to multiplication, and 4k plus 1. And then times, I'm going to go ahead and factor this real quick. That's going to be 4k plus 1, 4k minus 1. That's the difference of squareds all over k plus 3. And I have 15 seconds, so rapid fire. K plus 3 cancels with K plus 3. 4K plus 1 cancels with 4K plus 1. My final answer is 4K minus 1 over K.